Department of Pathology, thank you all for coming, and we hope you'll help spread the word. This is being recorded so that we can share it with some of our remote sites, the folks in Howard County, Bayview, and some of our other locations in the department. I want to thank Greg for also agreeing to do this. He has done a similar presentation at a couple other Hopkins conferences, and the committee asked if he would bring it to our department. He's customized it a bit further for us. Greg is a part of the Department of Pathology. He's been in IT healthcare for the last 16 years, 10 of which have been here at Hopkins. He's currently our project lead for the SOFT project, so some of you may have encountered him on that. He holds 2 degrees. He's got both the marketing and nursing background in addition to IT. He likes to make sure he's covered all the bases. And he has most recently gotten involved more and more with diversity initiatives throughout Hopkins. He was the founding chair for the network, which is the first affinity group here at Johns Hopkins Hospital for the LGBT community. And he has just also been nominated and accepted to serve on the Johns Hopkins Diversity Leadership Committee, and that is for Hopkins all entities, and he will serve on that committee for 3 years and help with a lot of our policies, procedures, events, activities, all things promoting diversity across the entire enterprise. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Greg. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for coming. I appreciate it. Most are familiar faces. I think there's only a few of you that I've never seen before, although some I've seen, but I don't know. So I'm going to jump right in, and I'll get started. Basically, I'm going to talk about a few things today. There's a portion of my presentation that I did for the Diversity Leadership Council was about equality in the workforce. But I also thought it would be worthwhile to throw some maybe fun stuff, some interesting facts. Perhaps I can teach you a little something about the gay community. And to take a step back, I am gay. I know not everybody knew that, or at least I think. I think most of the people I've talked to. I was married for 7 years. I have 2 children. My kids are 23 and 24, 2 boys. They both live with me and my partner of 13 years here in Baltimore City. So I may not be the most traditional gay man you've ever met or will meet, but that's my story. And we can talk more. Feel free to ask any questions during the presentation, or if you want to wait till the end, we can talk a little bit there. But I'm going to go through. This is basically the layout I've got. We're going to talk about gay pride, what that means, because it really means more than just a big party. There's actually significance to the words gay pride. We're going to talk a little bit about equality in the workforce and how Johns Hopkins stacks up to an accepted format of what needs to be done in a workforce to be an equal and welcoming employer. Also, how you might be able to get involved for whatever reason. Some resources that I covered, and a few little tidbits at the end that we might have some fun with that you might not have known and might find somewhat interesting. So we're just going to dive right in. What is gay pride? June is Pride Month. It's always been and always will be. And what this is a way to celebrate one's sexuality with others with a positive outlook. In other words, for many, many years, this has been stigmatized. Back in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. Essentially what this is it is a party. It's usually a festival. It's events in most large cities throughout the country and the world. They usually have parades, concerts. They'll do historical walks, art exhibits, festivals. The Pride event here in Baltimore is actually Father's Day. It's always Father's Day weekend. And yes, I do take my children with me, so it's kind of interesting. Actually, they work at one of the bars, so although they're both straight. New York City was the first gay pride, which was on June 28th of 1970. And there's some significance to the pride. It is being prideful. It is about being happy and proud to be gay. It's also, there's a reason why it's June every year. And there's also a reason why drag queens are associated with it. And I'll explain that in a minute. And there also may be a connection to Judy, and I'll explain that as well. So Stonewall was the site. It really wasn't the site of the first gay event. There were a couple of things that went on prior to Stonewall. There was something called One Ink. It was a publication that the Postal Service said was obscene, and they refused to deliver it back in the 50s. And this went all the way to the Supreme Court in the late 50s, early 60s. And the Supreme Court overturned it and said that The postal authority had no right to determine what was obscene and what wasn't. Essentially, this is where the community gets to determine what's obscene. So that was one of the first major court battles won for gay rights. There was also something called the Compton Cafeteria Riots in 1966. Basically, what happened there was the police showed up to arrest people who were dressed up in women's clothing, because it was illegal to be dressed in women's clothing. A riot ensued, some plates and dishes were thrown, and a plate glass window was broken. But the biggest event, the one that we've probably all heard about, were the Stonewall riots in New York City. This was a bar that was frequented by drag queens, homeless youth, and male prostitutes. It was the fringe element of the gay world even at that time. The age group was teens through early 30s, and it was a mix racially. It was white, black, Hispanic. There was no one group there. There were also women. Women were at the bar. There were men at the bar, and there were men dressed as women and women dressed as men at the bar. There were some interesting rules back in the day, which I'll talk about in a minute. The bar was mafia-owned, which most gay bars in New York City at the time were. They saw an opportunity to exploit the gay community. They actually charged a $3 admission to get in the bar in 1969. That would be just over $20 today. And I don't think most of us would go to the bar for $20. But this bar was full on this night. What had happened was this double-edged sword was they were dealing with the mafia, but they also had to deal with the police. And the interesting thing was the mafia was actually paying the police to not raid their bars, which normally the mafia extorts money from business owners to protect them. They were doing just the opposite with the police. There was increased raids were occurring, and they were closing down bars. The city basically wanted to clean up the city and close all the gay bars. When they showed up, you could be arrested if you had no ID, if you were dressed in full drag, or if you were a man dressed as a woman, or if you were a woman with less than 3 pieces of feminine clothing, you could be arrested. This is how they arrested the lesbians, okay? So, come June 28, 1969 at 1:20 a.m. The police show up at the bar. It tends to be a little crowded. It's 200 people at the bar. And they basically come in with 4 officers, and what was actually called the Public Morals Squad showed up. This sounds like something out of Dragnet for those of you old enough to remember. The standard protocol was they turn the lights on, everybody'd line up, and they'd go through the process of asking for IDs, determining if you're male or female, and whether you have the appropriate amount of clothes on if you are female. The crowd didn't go along with this night. They decided enough's enough. The crowd ended up outside. It got pushed outside. A few people had been arrested inside. They were loading them into paddy wagons, and the crowd started to grow. There were 200 people from the bar displaced outside. The crowd grew to about 600. And they began to, they questioned whether the cops had been paid off, so they started throwing coins at the police. And then they proceeded, one drag queen got a little out of hand. They were performing out on the street, and there was a lesbian that was being arrested, and she actually turned to the crowd and asked, "Aren't you going to do anything?" And that's when the crowd raised up. They actually rolled over a paddy wagon. They flipped it over in the middle of the street. And the interesting thing is the police, the 4 police that were left, because several groups had left in 3 other cars with flattened tires, they ran back into the bar and barricaded themselves inside the gay bar to get away from the gay people. So this basically was the beginning. And this all happened on June 28th, hence the reason why June is Pride Month. And the first Gay Pride March, which was June 28th the following year. Things began to change then. And the connection, the Judy connection, is Judy Garland. There's a lot of people that believe that Judy Garland was a gay icon, is still probably to a large degree. She actually died on June 22nd, 1969, which was just 6 days prior. She had open viewing on the 26th and 27th, also prior to this event. And people believe that the gay community was so upset about this. I think 50,000 people went to her viewing on the 28th. some people believe that they were so upset with Judy Garland dying and they'd kind of had enough and it was the final straw that broke the camel's back. It can't be proven, but there's some speculation that Judy Garland had a connection to the Stonewall riots. I'm going to jump, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to get to, you know what, I'm going to, because I'm not going to get, yeah, I do have volume.
How much discrimination do LGBT individuals face in the workplace? Research shows that up to 43% of gay people experience some form of workplace discrimination, harassment, or mistreatment on the job. And this can be anything from receiving a negative performance review from a boss who is openly anti-gay vandalism of a person's work area or common space, and even physical harassment and attacks. For transgender or gender nonconforming employees, it's even worse. 90% of transgender workers experience some form of harassment, discrimination, or mistreatment on the job. And this harassment and discrimination has real consequences for LGBT people and their families. They have higher rates of unemployment, higher rates of poverty, and lower rates of access to health insurance and health insurance coverage, which for most Americans is an employment benefit. What protections do LGBT workers currently have against discrimination? Currently, 21 states and the District of Columbia prohibit most public and private workplaces from discriminating on the basis of sexual orientation, and 14 of those states and the District of Columbia also prohibit discrimination on the basis of gender identity. At least 203 municipalities have enacted local ordinances prohibiting such discrimination. Furthermore, America's largest businesses have adopted policies that protect LGBT workers from discrimination in employment. Currently, 89% of Fortune 500 companies have sexual orientation policies, and 43% have gender identity policies. Many of these businesses are on the record stating that such policies are good for their bottom lines because they help recruit the best talent, reduce employee turnover, and create stable work environments for all workers, gay or straight, transgender or not. These laws and policies are great, but they create a patchwork of protections across the country that leave millions of workers without equal rights in the workplace, and they also leave many businesses confused about their legal responsibilities. What can we do to provide better protections for these workers? The most important thing we can do is work to pass the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, or ENDA, in Congress. ENDA would prohibit most workplaces across the nation from engaging in sexual orientation or gender identity discrimination. Note that everyone has a sexual orientation and a gender identity, so all workers, not just LGBT workers, would benefit from the law. There have been cases where straight and non-transgender women have been fired for not being feminine enough. ENDA would protect people in those types of situations. ENDA currently has 142 co-sponsors in the House and 39 in the Senate. Many organizations are working to educate lawmakers and the public about the problem of workplace discrimination and ENDA as a solution. Strangely, 90% of the public think a federal law like ENDA is already in place. President Obama has promised to sign ENDA if it reaches his desk. I truly hope it makes it to his desk because American workers should be judged solely on their skills and abilities and not factors or characteristics that are totally irrelevant to the workplace. Our economy would be stronger and our country fairer with ENDA in place.
Let me get rid of that. So why are we here? That was about employee non-discrimination, about the ENDA Act, which is actually, it's become active again in Congress. A couple of goals and the reasons why we're here. I recognize that some of you are here because you're curious. Maybe you have a family member, a friend, a coworker, and you want to understand a little bit more about what they go through in their day-to-day life. And what I'm here to talk about is some of the impact that the organization, that employers, and specifically Johns Hopkins is having on their life, some positives and some things where we could improve. I recognize also some of you are here because this is a continuing ed credit, and you know, hopefully you'll walk away with a little bit of something or at least a smile and have some fun. But what you can do is, I'm going to leave that up to you, and we'll talk a little bit more at the end. But you can get involved, even if you're not gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender. We need allies. We need people to support us. We need people behind us, kind of listening and, you know, speaking out for us when you hear something or see something. So the Out and Equal, oh, and I'm sorry, but that video was from the Center for American Progress. This is the Out and Equal Workplace. This is from an organization called outandequal.org. It's 20 steps to basically grade or evaluate how your organization, your employer does. It's broken out into 5 sections, multiple pieces. I'm just going to walk through and talk to you about how Hopkins is doing. And some things have changed probably in the recent, since I've done this originally back in May of last year, and some things will be changing very soon based on a few other things that occurred. So the equal policies and benefits. Actually, the organization does pretty well in this section, including sexual orientation in global non-discrimination and anti-harassment policies, include gender identity and expression in global non-discrimination and anti-harassment policies, recognize same-sex couples and their families. Actually, Johns Hopkins was the first private entity to offer same-sex benefits in the state of Maryland. Ensure the global health coverage includes complete health benefits for the transgender employees. This is something that actually Doris helped me put this together along with a couple other ladies from the Workforce Diversity Committee. We're not 100% on the transgender piece. I think there are things that they will do under certain health programs and some things they won't do, and the university may be slightly different than the hospital. The next section is talent management and professional development. This is an area that the organization doesn't do so well. They could probably stand a lot of improvement and to work on some of these things. In other words, establish and support LGBT employee resource groups. This has just started. Like Doris said earlier, we created the first LGBT group recognized here by the hospital about 3 years ago. The effort to recruit, hire, and monitor and mentor LGBT employees. This is something that the organizations need to do more, whether it be the university or the hospital. The university has created a safe space department of LGBT group for the students to go to a safe space and for questions, for concerns, but we are moving in a direction. Provide leadership development experiences specifically for the LGBT employee. Again, this is an area where overall we need to improve and we need to push this effort. Hopefully the group that I've involved with forming, as well as some folks in the audience, we can help to make some changes here as well. And then track recruitment and career development metrics for the LGBT employees and who choose to self-identify. Again, this is another area where we could improve. I don't believe we're doing any kind of tracking or real tracking on these folks. Talent management and professional development. This is a split bag for the hospital and Johns Hopkins. Establish and support LGBT employees resource groups. We do that. The organization does that. There are several groups out there. There is the network for the employees. There is a group for the students, primarily for the students, called Gertrude Stein, and it runs off of the main campus as well as out of the Bloomberg School. It's students and faculty participate in that. There's also a group at the Applied Physics Lab that was formed about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. The next item is recruit, hire, and offer mentoring to LGBT employees. Again, this is something that I think we're trying to work on, but again, the organization needs to improve. Include LGBT diversity objectives in management professional goals. It's a 2020 initiative, and they're looking for 20% minority and women. However, LGBT is not part of that 2020 initiative, 20%. Pathology does have this listed as a management objective to actively recruit, pursue, and develop all folks, LGBT as well. Communicate routinely to all employees. Sorry, did I get ahead of myself? I did. Track recruitment and provide development metrics for LGBT employees. Again, this is another area for tracking and recruitment is not something that we do well, and it's not something most organizations do well. It's a bit of an unknown for most folks. The workforce climate. Provide diversity training and specific reference to LGBT issues. Well, here we are. This is what we're here for. I think we do well with this. Use anonymous climate surveys to measure effectiveness of LGBT diversity policies and programs. Again, something we do well, but we could probably improve on. Include LGBT diversity objectives. Does everyone know what LGBT stands for, by the way? I keep saying that. It's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. The acronym grows as well. It can grow to Q, which could be questioning or queer. I think there's an A in there on some of them. I'm not sure. I think that's asexual. But there's a lot of acronyms that this can expand into. But generally, you'll see it listed as LGBT. Communicate routinely to all employees how the organization supports its LGBT workforce. Again, these are some areas where the workplace climate, it's not a bad climate. It is a hospital. Generally speaking, I think myself, I feel comfortable here as a gay man. I don't feel I'm harassed. I feel my job is protected. I feel safe. I do think it could improve. I think there could be more outreach and more could be done. And then on to the community commitment. Support nonprofit groups working for LGBT equality. This doesn't happen. There is little or no support by the organization to any entities out there that are doing anything in the LGBT community. The Gay and Lesbian Community Center here in Baltimore, they're the ones that sponsor Pride every year. I think they've reached out to healthcare year after year. University of Maryland has gotten involved in the past, but Hopkins has never gotten involved. Perhaps they haven't been approached properly or the right person hasn't been approached, but it's something, again, we could improve on. Sponsor and encourage visible participation in LGBT cultural events. Again, we're not seeing this from the organization. Hopefully, things will move. There's a lot of attention to LGBT areas now, and hopefully we'll see Hopkins getting more involved in these events and these activities. Include LGBT images in marketing and advertising strategies. This is something that did happen. For those of you who know what this is, the multicultural calendar for 2013, that's someone's picture. I can autograph copies at the end if you'd like. But they emphasized gay, lesbian, veteran, and disabled in this year's calendar. And the last item on the list is include LGBT-owned businesses in supplier diversity program objectives. This isn't being done, but no one really knows how you would do it because there is no list of LGBT-owned businesses out there. I think some larger cities have started to form some of these lists and pull them together, but in the Baltimore city area, it's hard to find an LGBT company unless you know somebody that knows somebody. And the last item of the 5 blocks is advocacy and corporate responsibility. Be a visible role model for LGBT workplace equality in the community. I think this happens. I think it's happened because Hopkins was the first to recognize and offer same-sex partnership benefits. But this is also one of those things where the organization can't do it alone. It requires the people of the organization to make the noise and push the effort. The next item on the list is support public policy efforts to protect LGBT workplace equality. Again, I think that this is something Hopkins is doing well in with the same-sex benefits, but that was almost 20 years ago, and it's time for them to step up and do something else. We've gotten there. And I have to be careful within the organization, within my network group as to what I say. I'm not allowed to push and advocate for certain things going on in the community and the state because I have to be careful to walk that line between employee and advocate. Actively oppose any attempts that would limit or restrict LGBT workforce equality. I think this is something that the hospital does very well with. I think that that within the organization itself, within its policies, they do restrict this and they do protect the LGBT. I myself, as a professional in the position I'm in, I've worked with many of you and I've been treated very well by all of you, but I'm sure there are people in this organization that work perhaps in security or maintenance or the cafeteria or maybe some of the nursing staff, who knows, may not feel as comfortable as I do or are not treated as well as I have been since I've been working in the department. And the last item on the list is share leading practices on LGBT workplace equality. Again, an area we could improve on, that we could definitely reach out and hopefully after this presentation, and I kind of got Doris's ear and I can pull on Al Valentine's ear a little bit, maybe we'll get some things happening. So what can you do? I mean, hopefully you didn't all come for the continuing ed credits. And even if you did come for the continuing ed credits, and even those on film watching do want to get involved, want to make a difference. The network is not limited, and this is what we call the JHH LGBT group. It is not limited to gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender. It's also advocates and friends of. You can get involved. You can attend. We created about 3 years ago, and we had a big push to get the organization created. We were the first one out there, the first affinity group, as Doris had mentioned. And everybody got busy, and interest lagged a bit. So it's been languishing for the last 2 years or so. It'll kick back up. We're going to kick it back up and try to get some events going. We'll try to bring some speakers into the organization. Some things have happened recently with same-sex marriage passing here in Maryland. The Boy Scout vote was another recent thing in national news. There was I wasn't supposed to talk about this, but there was a physician recently who talked a lot. Attention has been drawn to this, and I think we need to educate the local community, that being the Johns Hopkins Hospital, about who we are and what we stand for. And again, there's some information there about myself. I'm easy to find. I think I'm the only Rex in Outlook, so if you search last name Rex, I'm it. The Gertrude Stein group, which is the university, it's primarily a student group, and think about starting something at your location, because wherever you're at, you can have your own little chapter, your own little group, and pursue fairness in your workplace. And it doesn't have to be related to LGBT, although I hope it would be. These are some of the resources that we utilized in putting this together, and I had a lot of help from a couple ladies that aren't here today, Rodera Osborne and Alana Dennis. They helped us pull together some of this information. They work for the Workforce Diversity, the Office of Workforce Diversity, and Doris Pendergrass also helped extensively in pulling this together. But you can see the Diversity Leadership Council. These are some of the resources that you can look for online. And this will be online with the presentation will actually be online with the film version. Johns Hopkins Institute Community Diversity, there's a lot of JHU, the climate surveys, a lot of diversity, and the list goes on. Some tidbits. So these are some fun things that I thought I'd throw out there. Some of them are a little more serious than others. And some of them are things that we may take up as a group by the network. As the video said, there is no federal employment protection for LGBT folks, none. I could be fired right now. The state protects me, the locality protects me. However, there is some efforts on the federal level, and this happens every once in a while, that they're trying to pass laws to supersede state and local laws and not allow them to protect me, to allow people to fire me for whatever reason. I don't think that's going to happen, but there's efforts out there. ENDA, for the first time in many years, is actually seeing some life this year. It's actually, I believe it was close to a vote, or was up for a vote, or will be up for a vote this year. It's very possible it could pass. This is employee protection for not just LGBT. It protects women. It protects many other minorities in housing, in employment, across the board. It's actually, I don't want to advocate for it, but it actually is a good thing. Same-sex marriage is now legal in 25% of the states in this country. That's almost doubled since November of 2012, when Maryland, along with Washington and Maine, all passed, overrode referendums, or actually passed it by ballot. Something you may not know, something some of you probably do know, actually, where's Sandra? Since men who have sex with men, or they're called MSM, are not permitted to donate blood in the United States if they've had sex with a man since 1977. The reason for that is that's when somehow the federal government, that's when the HIV/AIDS crisis started. That's their start point. There's a huge concern with this. Some people may advocate that the ban needs to stay in place. Some will tell you that it's ridiculous because we can test the blood appropriately and we're missing out on a huge part of the population that would be more than willing to donate. Many countries, the EU has recently stopped this. There's actually a clause in there. Now, might I, if you are a prostitute and you've had paid sex in the last 12 months, you can't donate blood. If you go beyond 12 months, you're allowed to donate blood, even though you're a paid prostitute, but gay men can't if you've ever had sex with a man. So the EU has stopped this. In other words, if it's been 12 months, you can donate. Canada, I think, is at 5 years now. I think there's a 5-year window. So I think they're missing out on something here. There's another this is a little pet peeve of mine. Sex versus gender. Some people want to be polite and proper and say gender. But really, gender is not, when you're referring to someone, male, female, you want to use the term sex. In the systems we use throughout the course of the day, it's a sex is what you are biologically. A gender is what you self-identify or what you believe you are. So I hear it a lot. I actually heard it recently in a large group meeting with nursing. And the nurses were referring to, one lady was saying, one minute she would say they're having problems with the EPIC system. I know we've all heard about EPIC. They're having problems with the EPIC system because you can enter a patient without entering their sex. Oh, I mean gender. She was trying to be proper in her use of terms. The term is sex. It's called sex. How do you refer to homosexuals? My name's Greg. That works for me. I've asked Mike Huppenthal and Al Valentine to call me Mr. Rex, but they refuse to do that. But no, the term gay is acceptable for men. You can refer to me as a homosexual. There are a couple of terms we don't prefer. Fag or faggot is actually a very derogatory term. However, there are youth that are embracing that term, and there are people within the community that embrace it amongst themselves. It's an odd situation. The term queer is also one that's being embraced more by young people now. That most people of my age, that one doesn't sit as well, but it's not as bad as. You can refer to women as lesbian. They'll go with gay as well. So don't hesitate to ask as well. If you don't know the answer, you don't have to try to be PC. You can actually ask. I think most gay people will be happy to tell you what works, what doesn't work, and kind of walk you through down that pathway. We do have long-term relationships. I've been in one for 13 years. I know people who have been in relationships for over 40 years. My relationship with my current partner has actually lasted longer than my marriage did. So it's probably lasted longer than most marriages do. So yes, we do function. We live next door. We have nice houses. We have great yards because we have nothing else to do because most of us don't have kids. But we don't have an agenda. If we do, no one has told me what it is. We're not out there conspiring or trying to push. We are trying to push things. We are working toward equality. We would love that, and that's our goal. But to have an agenda, as some portray us, I don't think that's the case. Another interesting fact is the DSM had listed homosexuality as an illness up until 1973. So we were considered, or I was considered, mentally ill. I would have been 9. And they removed all forms from the DSM in 1987. That was 2 years before I was married. And recently, the DSM-5 has come out, and they have, I believe it's gender identity disorder, they have renamed it as gender dysmorphia. I'm not sure whether that's a good or a bad thing, but that's what they call it now. A few acknowledgements. These are some of the websites that I went to that I pulled information from. I'll let you read through it. I'm not going to read those to you. And again, I did want to mention Alana Dennis, Rodera Osborne, and Doris Pendergrass, who helped me pull this all together. And at this point, I will be happy to take questions if anyone has any. And we'll go from there. Yes?
What did ENDA stand for?
Employment Non-Discrimination Act. Was that a question on for continuing ed? I shouldn't have answered it, should I?
No, I'm curious.
And that, I think it's been out. I think it's been an active. It's actually an act. Early 70s, mid 70s. It's been floundering around Washington since I think Jimmy Carter's. Yeah. Anything else? Yes.
The group that's for the students, that name, is that the person who started that organization for students?
You're not asking easy questions. I think Gertrude Stein, I believe she was a writer, and she was believed to be a lesbian. I don't know if she ever came out as a lesbian, but feminist, yes. But I think she was believed to be a lesbian as well. Yes?
I've always sort of wondered about the transgender, how you I know I can ask one, but I don't actually know any personally. But I guess I saw one on a television program, and people were raving about how they treated this person on this television program, in that they didn't call attention to the fact that she. Okay, so my question is, do you refer to transgender people as, if it's a male dressing as a woman and identifying as a woman, do you refer to them as women? Do you refer to that person as she and her? Or do you, I'm confused about that.
I think generally if a person looks female, you probably want to refer to them as such.
Okay.
But again, it goes back to don't hesitate to ask. I actually served on the Gay and Lesbian Community Center board here in Baltimore City, and there was a transgender male to female on the board. She was fully changed. I had never, I guess I could say I struggled with it because I didn't know. I'd never known any transgender people. I didn't know how to reach out or what to call them. It was a fascinating story. She was married, was still married, was still legally married, which was interesting because everybody talks about same-sex marriage, and the fact of the matter is it was a man-woman that got married. Then the man became a woman, and legally changed the birth certificate to be female, and is now married to a woman. Because the divorce is still legal. So it's an interesting. But the most interesting part of it is she, as a man, and as changed into a woman, worked at a scrap metal yard, running a crane, one of those big jaws, down in D.C., and went through this change in that environment, which had to have been tough. But she said, no, everybody was great. Everybody was so cool about it. She said, never had a problem. And I struggle with it too, because I picture them in my head, and it can be a struggle. But you know what? I don't think anyone here would hesitate to think, for any transgender person to, if you asked,
So it's an individual thing, you think? Like, if there was a person sitting here, then yes, you would ask that person, but maybe the next person would prefer to be referred to as he.
But right, and it really goes to gender, as to what one perceives themselves as, and how they want to be referred to.
And now some of them have sex change operations.
Yes.
Totally. Are they then transgender, or are they actually women?
Well, to be able to alter, my understanding, and I could be wrong here, but to be able to alter the birth certificate, you have to be fully operative and changed to the other sex.
And then you're not.
You're no longer what you were, you are what you are.
Well,
Yes.
and you're also not transgender, are you?
I think most people still feel akin to the community because that is probably, of the LGBT group, that is probably the most misunderstood and most confusing for most people. I think many of us within the community, with the LGB struggle. I've done it myself.
And the thing that's interesting to me is that I can totally understand that those people have, I think, the most frustrating
Agreed.
situation, because I think that they're born with different amount of hormones or whatever it is. They just feel like they are misplaced. They're not really men or not really women. They are the opposite thing, and yet they have this thing. They have their sex organs that are the opposite of how they feel, and that has to be the most frustrating people. They can't be so much who they feel they can,
Right.
they should be, unless they go to this extreme length of having their sex change operation, which that is a big.
That's huge. That is huge. I mean, yeah.
I guess I feel the most empathy for those people, and, for whatever that's worth.
I agree completely. I've even said to people that, you could argue with me that my being gay is a choice, and you're entitled to your opinion. I think I believe what I believe, and I know that I was born this way. But what a struggle it must be to be something completely different than what your body portrays. Yeah. Yes.
Where does the rainbow?
A guy in San Francisco developed that, and it had to do, each one of the colors in the rainbow represents unity, happiness, pride. There's several, each one of them has a meaning. You can search it online. And there were actually more colors in it then than there are now, but the two of the colors were so close together they just morphed them into a single, I think, purple. There were two different shades of purple. Don't ask me. And there was pink in there too, and I don't know why I know that. But it's been a symbol of gay pride for decades. Yeah, some gentleman in San Francisco started that. Good questions. Great questions. Anything else? Stonewall's still there, by the way. It's actually, it's a hole in the wall, but it's still there. I was there maybe 10 years ago. I actually walked in just to see it. And it's a pretty nondescript bar. You walk in, it's a big open room like this, and I think there was a bar on the right-hand side, and then there was a bar in the back. I mean, it was nothing fancy, nothing exciting. It's interesting where our history lies. Anything else? All right. Happy to answer any questions if you have any more at the end, if you want to ask privately. Thank you.